Hello everyone, Mr. Quality Guy here, and today we're going to do a video on the Ford Pinto and Mercury Bobcat. They're both similar vehicles, and we're going to, of course, talk about the issues that the Ford Pinto had and the perception of lack of safety in the Ford Pintos. So, sit back, relax, and we'll get right to it. Alrighty, so when we talk about the Ford Pinto, the basically what's going to be is the rear bumper issue with the fuel tank. So, the Ford Pinto is a subcompact car that was manufactured and marketed by Ford Motor Company in North America from 1971 to 1980 model years. The Ford Pinto was the first subcompact vehicle produced by Ford in North America. Mercury offered a rebadged version of the Pinto as the Mercury Bobcat from 1975 to 1980. The design of the Pinto fuel system was complicated by uncertain regulatory environment during the development period. The first federal standard for automotive fuel system safety passed in 1967, known as Section 301, and the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards initially only considered front impacts. In January 1969, 18 months into the Pinto's development cycle, the NHTSA proposed an expanding the standard to cover rear-end collisions. The proposed standard was based on a 20-mile-per-hour moving barrier rear impact test. Ford publicly announced it supported the standard. In August 1970, the month the Pinto went into production, NHTSA changed the proposal to a more stringent 20-mile-per-hour fixed barrier standard, which car companies were to meet in 18 months. The fixed barrier standard was seen by the auto industry as a significant increase in test severity. At the same time, the NHTSA announced a long-term goal of setting a 30-mile-per-hour fixed barrier standard. Due to the confusion related to the various proposed standards and an expectation that the NHTSA would not select more stringent 30-mile-per-hour fixed barrier standard, Ford elected to voluntarily meet the 20-mile-per-hour moving barrier standard for all cars by 1973. Ford and other automobile manufacturers objected to the more stringent fuel system safety standards and filed objections during the required comment periods of the proposed regulations. The Pinto's design positioned its fuel tank between the solid live rear axle and the rear bumper, a standard practice in U.S. subcompact cars at the time. The Pinto's vulnerability to fuel leakage and fire in a rear-end collision was exacerbated by the reduced rear crush space, a lack of structural reinforcement in the rear, and essentially ornamental rear bumper, though similar to other manufacturers. There are two legal cases that define the Ford Pinto or provide evidence of the safety issues of the vehicle, and those cases would be Grimshaw v. Ford Motor Company and Indiana v. Ford Motor Company. So when we look at the Grimshaw case, the Grimshaw v. Ford Motor Company, decided in February 1978, is one of two important Pinto cases. A 1972 Pinto driven by Lily Gray stalled in the center lane of a California freeway. The car was struck from behind by a vehicle initially traveling at 50 miles per hour and impact at an estimated 30 mile to 50 mile per hour, resulting in a fuel tank fire. Gray died at the time of impact. Richard Grimshaw and the 13-year-old passenger was seriously burned. The plaintiff's bar collaborated with Mother Jones and the Center for Automotive Safety to publicize damning information about Ford prior to the trial. The jury awarded $127.8 million in total damage, $125 million in punitive damages, and almost $3 million in compensatory damages to passenger Richard Grimshaw, and $665,000 in compensatory damage to the family of the deceased driver, Lily Gray. The jury award was said to be the largest ever in U.S. product liability and personal injury cases. Jury award was the largest against an automaker at the time. The judge reduced the jury punitive damage award to $3.5 million, which he later said was still larger than any other punitive damage award in the state by a factor of about 5. Ford subsequently decided to settle related cases out of court. Reaction to the Grimshaw case was mixed. According to Los Angeles Times in 2010, the award signaled to the auto industry that it would be harshly sanctioned for ignoring known defects. The case has been held up as an example of disconnection between the use of corporate risk analysis and tendency of juries to be offended by such analysis. The The case is also cited as an example of irrational punitive damage awards. While supporting the finding of liability, Schwartz notes that the punitive damage award is hard to justify. And that, in reality, if we look at this on the surface, you're trying to give almost $3 million to a passenger to survive, but the person that died, their family only got $665,000. So then we wonder, hey, is it cheaper for these companies to design products that in the event of an accident will kill people? And that was the whole idea about the tray table up kind of deal, is that, hey, it's cheaper to pay out for a death than it's cheaper to pay out for an injury. And as much as that sounds horrible, in many cases, as we're seeing, that tends to be true. The next case is Indiana v. Ford Motor Company. So on August 10th, 1978, 3 teenage girls of the Ulrich family of Osceola, Indiana, were killed when a 1973 Pinto they were in was involved in a rear-end collision. The driver had stopped in the road to retrieve the car's gas cap, which had been inadvertently left on the top of the car and subsequently fell onto the road. While stopped, the Pinto was struck by a Chevrolet van. Ford sent the Ulrich a recall notice for the Pinto in 1979. A grand jury indicted Ford on 3 counts of reckless homicide. Indiana v. Ford was a landmark in product liability laws as the first time a corporation faced criminal charges for a defective product, and the first time a corporation was charged with homicide. If convicted, Ford faced a maximum fine of $30,000 under Indiana's 1978 reckless homicide statute. Ford legal defense was vastly more ambitious than the effort mounted in the Grimshaw case. The effort was led by James F. Neal, with a staff of 80 prosecuting attorneys, and a budget around $1 million. The Elkhart County prosecuting attorney had a budget of about $20,000, and volunteer law professors and law students. A former head of the NHTSA, testifying on Ford's behalf, said the Pinto design was no more or less safe than that of any other car in the class. In 1980, Ford was found not guilty. In 1980, a civil suit was settled for $7,500 for each plaintiff. So, when we talk about this again, this is another one of those issues where the key word here is these accidents shouldn't have happened because they were so easy to avoid. In this case. But let's go on to... Okay. So a Rutgers Law Review article by former UCLA law professor Gary T. Schwartz, see Section 7.3 NHTSA investigation, examined the fatality rates of Pinto and several other small cars at the time period. He noted that fires and rear-end fires in particular are a very small portion of overall auto fatalities. At the time, only 1% of automobile crashes would result in fire, and only 4% of fatal accidents involved fire. And only 15% of fatal fire crashes are a result of rear-end collisions. When considering the overall safety of the Pinto, subcompact cars as a class have a generally higher fatality risk. Pintos represented 1.9% of all cars on the road in the 1975-1976 period. During that time, the car represented 1.9% of all fatal accidents, accompanied by some fire. This implies the Pinto was average for all cars and slightly above average for its class. When all types of fatalities are considered, the Pinto was approximately even with the AMC Gremlin, Chevrolet Vega, and Datsun 510. It was significantly better than the Datsun 1200 210, the Toyota Corolla, and the VW Beetle. The safety record of the car in terms of fire was average or slightly below average for compacts, and all cars respectively. This was considered respectable for a subcompact car. Only when considering the narrow subset of rear impact fire fatalities for a car were somewhat worse than average for subcompact cars. While acknowledging this as an important legal point, Schwartz rejected the portrayal of the car as a fire trap. So, essentially, we run into another case such as with the Chevrolet Corvair, that the media gets a hold of something and portrays a false narrative. Is the Ford Pinto a safety risk? Well, yes, but all subcompact cars at that time were. They weren't designed well. Most American vehicles in the early 70s, even early 80s, are just not good. They're not safe. They're not reliable. They're built horribly, and this is because the transition from there's multiple reasons. There's a transition from standard drafting to now using CAD to design everything. The reasons for issues are generally self-inflicted. So, that's all the information on the Mercury Bobcat / Ford Pinto. And is Ford really to be at fault for this? Well, I'm going to leave that up for you to decide. Alrighty, so that was a video on the Ford Pinto. If you are interested in more topics like this, don't hesitate to like and subscribe. And as well as all of our videos, we leave them open to the discretion of the viewer to make their decision. So, thank you all for watching, and have a great day.